Topaz, how are you?
Jim, it's good to be here. I got to tell you, I've been listening to your podcast, and it's good to be with somebody who's been so invested for so long about human connection. And obviously, you have a business model that works, but it just means a lot.
Well, I'm intrigued by you and your story and your journey, and you're so much younger. You have a lot of journey ahead of you, and I'm really curious just about how that'll shape itself. But growing up in Santa Monica, pretty special place to be. Then you went to Berkeley.
I went to UC Berkeley, and I studied at the Oxford St. Catherine's College in Oxford, philosophy.
Yeah, and all, philosophy, both places.
Yeah, I figured I want to learn how to think first before I applied it. And I don't think I'm a very good philosopher, but I enjoyed it a lot.
I can't help. I'll jump around because I'm intrigued by you, Topaz. I saw a bit of the interview you did knee to knee with your dad, where he talked about what he regretted, what he was embarrassed about. That was powerful.
Can you relate to that?
I can and I can't. My dad died young, 62, so youngish. I had a good relationship with him, but the World War II veteran guys, was the strong, silent type, so wasn't a lot of emotion shown. And one story I've told here before is we grew up in a neighborhood. The best way to describe the neighborhood is if you've ever seen the movie Goodfellas, that was my neighborhood. I knew a lot of those characters. So it was a big influence of Italian Americans, some Irish, Jews, a nice melting pot, but the dominant group that most of my friends were from was the Italian group. And culturally, they were different. And I really admired the fact that they had recent immigration, so they had a language different from English, and they had rituals and customs and a big celebration around food at the table. So when it came to dinner time, if you were going to be at a friend's house, you made sure you were at an Italian friend's house, because if you got invited over, it was worthwhile. But there's a lot of hugging and kissing among men in the Italian culture, and even in the Jewish culture, but not so much in the Irish culture. And I remember my dad, like when I was in my early 20s, confronted me one time. I don't know how he came to do this, and say, you stopped kissing me when you were 12 years old. And it really hurt me. I said, well, you waited 10 years to bring it up. He said, well, I only brought it up because I saw you with some of our Italian friends and you gave them a hug and a kiss. And I said, well, that's germane to their culture. He goes, why isn't it germane to our culture? I would have liked if you continued to. I said, well, thank God you mentioned something. But 10 years later, you finally mentioned something. And we resumed. And I've made it a point with my boys to tell them that story and to tell them, I see you in public. I see you in private. I walk up to you in a ball field. You come over, give me a hug and a kiss. Because if not, I'm going to embarrass you because I'm coming for you. And it made a difference. But that little incident that happened between my dad and I changed my behavior, especially with my kids for the rest of my life and my grandkids.
Amazing. But I can sense from the podcast I've listened to you that your family is really important and creating the space for the family together. I've heard you mention that a few times. You talk about the family time. And do you have any regrets with your kids?
Yes. And a big one. And we've had this conversation, and they deny it. But when they were young, I was, had my business. I was working like a dog. I worked 7 days a week. And I didn't spend enough time with them. They said, no, you always made time to be with us. I know I didn't. But that's a major league regret. And I'm trying to make up for it now. So I was at a lacrosse game for one grandson yesterday. I was at a cookie sale for a granddaughter yesterday. We get the schedule. If we're going to be in New York on a weekend, I write to my 3 kids and representing 7 grandkids. Okay, what's the schedule? What do you got going on this week? Because we want to get to as many things as we can. So it's, yes, very important. And your kids are very young. But now moving away to Uruguay, you're away from your parents.
Yeah.
And you're away from your wife's parents. Are they still in Mexico?
Yeah, she has a great family. She has a wonderful family. That's the big loss, is being away from family. But there's a different payoff for the environment that we raise our kids in. And that's been something that I've really been thinking about since my son was born 4 years ago. For me, the flip side of the regret and spending the time with my kid is I really want to spend a lot of time with my kid, and I'm trying to shape my life so that I can. That's part of also being the the business that I have, which is a lot of online, and our ability now to chat. But the thing that I find myself is, even though I create the time for me to be with my kids, I find that I feel so empowered when I'm at work. Like I have so much more agency and ability to execute and create than when you're with your 4-year-old and 1-year-old, who, as much as I love them,
Because
they're
they're
the
in
boss.
charge.
They're the charge, and they do what they want, and they don't,
Yeah.
kudos to my wife who spends a lot of time with them. But I find like, oh, I want to spend time with them, but I feel most empowered in terms of my ability to create and execute at work. And when I'm with them, it's a different trip, and I have to shift into that. And I find sometimes,
Yeah, it is a shift because you have to find different rewards, different psychic payoffs.
yeah, right.
Now, take us on the journey. You come to New York in 2001 at a horrific time, but you came here to be in a social situation, and like other times, there's a bit of a paralysis in the city. What's the first thing you did professionally when you arrived in New York?
Well, the first question, I came to New York saying, I know I want to tell stories, and I don't know what my role is in telling stories. I don't know if I'm an editor, if I'm a director of photography, if I'm a producer, what am I? I'm not sure. I need to learn. So my first question was, how should I learn? Should I go to school or should I teach myself? Because I had a lot of friends at Columbia Film School and NYU Film School. And so when you say professionally, that was the first choice, is what am I doing in order to establish my professional future? Do I go study in school or do I do it myself? And I knew who I was. I knew my personality. And my personality was, if I don't wake up in the morning without a candle under my backside, meaning I got to make it happen today, I won't operate. Like if I'm in school where I know, well, I did the project, I did the semester's project, I can relax now. The rest of the semester would be a cakewalk. I need to wake up every day saying, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? So I didn't go to school, and I did consider it. And I remember walking to the dean's office at NYU, somehow getting to the 7th floor, somehow knocking on her door, somehow getting in and sitting there and go, I have a question for you. Why should I go to film school instead of teaching myself, spending all that money on making my own films and teaching myself versus in the school? And she kind of flippantly said, well, because you'll have the chance to direct actors. And I thought, that's bullshit. I can direct actors right now on the street. There's so many. Are you kidding me? Like, and on top of that, you have someone who had the chutzpah to walk into your office, somehow get through security, walk into your office and ask you this question, and you don't really give this guy the time of day. That's the treatment I'm going to get in school. So you know what? I'm going to create my own curriculum, and I did. And so that's really what I did. I took the money I would have spent on tuition, if you will, and spent on my own education by learning.
And what were you doing in Sweden before?
So in Sweden, I was traveling around. I was in India and I was in Australia, and I was just kind of finding myself. And I was moving. I'd walk into restaurants that were packed, and I start bussing tables, or I clean in the back in the kitchen, because my family had a restaurant, so I know how restaurants work, just to like earn some extra cash or food. And I'd be moving antique furniture or whatever, and then I needed cash. It was running out, and my good friend, one of my very good friends, he was starting a startup in Sweden, and he said, do you want to have a job? I said, I'll make you a deal. I'm going to fly in, because it was his second venture. The first venture I was a part of, in the end, it didn't work out. He left, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm not passionate about it. He ended up selling for $33 million a year later. And I was backpacking in Australia. And he called me. He says, Topaz, remember that company that you were a part of? You had 10%? Well, we just sold it for 33. And I was thinking, what a great story. I would have had $3 million in the pocket at 24. There's something, but I knew it was a story. And I also knew that I didn't deserve it. Like the hard work that him and his partners did to get the company there, I wasn't part of that. And even if, anyways, it was a great story to tell in a moment like this, 30 years later, 40 years later. So, but the impetus was just, he said, I'm starting a incubator. Do you want to come work with me? And I said, well, I need the cash. I'll come work for you 18 months, and then I'll go back, I'll do the next thing. And in that time, I really honed in on my love of filmmaking. And I said, I need to go to a place where there's humanity, and I should go to New York. And so after a year, I moved to New York.
So I know you speak 4 languages, obviously English and Spanish. What else do you speak?
Hebrew and Swedish.
Swedish. You learned Swedish on that stay, huh?
Pretty easy. Yeah. I mean, look, I could have a basic conversation in Swedish,
You
but
can
I
get
don't think
along,
I
yeah.
could. Yeah, I couldn't have a podcast level conversation. But I mean, it's been 25 years since I was living there. I'm 47 now. So
And your dad said he's from Serbia.
yeah, my dad's born in Macedonia, Skopje, Macedonia, which was part of Yugoslavia at the time. And then my father was 6 years old when he was taken to when the Bulgarians it was 1943. He was 6, and they collected all the Jews and they sent them all to Treblinka to burn, to be liquidated. And my family is 9 of the 169 that survived from Macedonia, and they survive, yeah, by fleeing to Albania, where they posed as Muslims for a year and a half, and they pretended to be Muslim. And in
Stories are amazing.
in '94 they made a film. An Israeli director made a film about my dad's. And while they're there, they asked the family, "Did you know?" It was Ali and Rajib were 2 brothers who took in our family. And this is 50 years later. Did you know they were Jews? And they're like, "Oh yeah, we knew they were Jews from the day they arrived, and we just hid them anyways." And on the flip side, my father was in fear, my family was in fear of being discovered, but the family knew them and hid them just the same. So that story is very much embedded in my identity in terms of,
Oh, it has to be.
yeah.
It must make you anxious and concerned about the current state of affairs in Israel and Gaza, huh?
It's very challenging, obviously. It's also challenging when you spent 10 years of your life creating this thing about the and, which is about conversations. And I'm wondering, how can I apply this beautiful format to create empathy and understanding and connection in this world? How can I use it more? How can I, use it to make a better world? And look at what's happening. And it's just,
And do you think that's possible, or is the cultural divide there too wide?
I don't have an answer, but what I do sense is that social media is not helping. And what I mean by that is because we get good at what we practice. And in social media, we're not practicing listening. We're not practicing listening. And if we could practice listening to each other, things will get better in all facets, right?
It's something I wanted to delve into. You mentioned that with the advent of technology, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, where we have this facility in terms of video connection, it seemed to me that in the earliest days of social media, it offered the promise of people having more and maybe better friends, better relationships. But it seems like it's failed so far in that regard. I would tell you in my life, now I'm an old guy, so not a social media, not born digitally, way far away from it. But social media has been socially beneficial in my life. Keep family and extended family together, to communicate with friends. I've mentioned several times on this podcast that, especially during the early days of COVID, one of the things I think about and we've reported on, and I'd like to share with you, is that one of the podcasts we've received the most feedback on, Topaz, is I invited 3 of my friends to join me in a discussion. None of them knew the other. So none of them knew the other. They were friends of mine, but not together. And we had a conversation. These are all 3 smart and thoughtful men. And I asked them what the role of adult male relationships is to them. And one of them is the quarterback of a group of 10 of us that we affectionately call ourselves the Old Farts Club. So these are 10 extraordinary men. I'm the youngest by 14 years, so that tells you how old we are. But they're remarkable men. 3 of them are now in their 90, 91, and 92. 2 are 87. 1 is 88. And they're all in good spirits, reasonably good health. And the common thing is they're all still working. Now, some have gone on to second, third, fourth, and fifth careers. But we know how important adult male relationships are. So one, Ken Orletta, who is part of that 3-person team, has a lot of experience talking about it, and we as a group talk about it. We're baseball fans. We gather at spring training for a weekend, the 10 guys. We have good, clean fun. We talk about baseball. We drink good wine. We have some good food. And we're just together all those hours watching the games. And then at dinner, we talk about really important personal subjects. And there's not a lot of groups you could have that conversation with, but the trust and the intimacy, which you talk so much about, is there. And I have several groups that I'm fortunate enough to be part of, and each of them was from a different group. And we've gotten so much feedback on that. You do so much with couples, and especially being nomadic that you've been, traveling on your own like that through Europe as a young man, moving on your own to New York, moving to where your wife is from in Mexico, going to study in the UK, now going to Uruguay to try and find the best possible place for you and your wife, and especially for your 2 young children. How do you think about the importance of a good, healthy adult male relationships, and does social media help you in that regard?
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. There's a lot there. First thing that comes to mind, I just want to acknowledge my dad, who's 86 and still working. And he is young and vibrant. And
There's something to it.
Something to it, offering value, right? Offering value, having a purpose of value, which obviously you can do that with friends and family too, but there's just something there about being challenging.
And it's social too.
Totally. Right? I think one thing I just want to say, our work is focused, even the book is called 12 Questions for Love. It's not just for romantic, it's for any type of intimate relationship. There we go. But it's for any type of intimate relationship with your father, with a best friend.
I saw that.
So, the question that's come up for me lately is, how do I show up for people? I have some friends that have cancer. I'm 47. That's creeping up. I have some friends who are supporting their parents who are in their 80s, late 90s, who are dying or have died. So the question for me in terms of, and we talk about adult male, is how do I show up for my friends? How do I show up for my friends? And one thing I realize is, how do I show up for my friends? How do I show up for myself? Enables them to show up for me. Because sometimes I don't show up for myself because I don't let them know what I need. And I expect them to know, or expect them to fill in like they should know. And then I get upset, and that affects the relationship. And I realize I'm not showing up for myself by letting them know what I need, and then they can show up for me. That's been a learning. Because I was somewhat playing like a martyr, like I take care of everyone and they don't show up for me. It's like, Topaz, are you showing up for yourself? Are you letting them know that you're going through a trauma right now, or that you're being challenged, or that you need to check in?
That brings you back to questions, which is, everything you're about. And I see that in friendships that I have. For you, ringing a bell.
Yeah. I had a good friend who died on Monday, a week ago today. He's one of the really good guys. He just biked. He's about 68, 70 years old. And he biked from Shanghai to Istanbul on a bicycle, not a motorbike, on a bicycle. It was a dream he had. He did the Silk Road.
Wow.
And then he was living in New Zealand. He lives in New Zealand. And he was bicycling. And I believe he had a heart attack while he was biking, and he died. Biking. Doing what he loved.
Yeah. And if he did a trip like that, you would think he'd be as strong as imaginable. Yeah.
Yeah. And we come from a group, Edmund Hillary Fellow. It's part of this global impact group. And he was one of them. We're in the first cohort. And this cohort, we met in October of 2018, and we hadn't really been in touch. And when he passed away, we said, we need to get in touch. We need to see each other. I called my closest friends in that cohort to see how they're doing. And it's just unfortunate when the temporalness of life reminds you of how delicate it is, and what's most important is our relationships. And let's not let it happen that someone has to pass away, or for you to realize how much you miss them, or how much of a beautiful relationship you have with them. I mean, and Just because they physically pass doesn't mean that they're necessarily gone. You still have conversations with them in some degree, but they're not there in the same way, and you can't really echo and echo about your what you see and what they see in life, and share notes, share trail notes, if you will. I just think that's what's important.
So sorry to hear about the loss of your friend. Were there some good conversations among your survivors of that group as a result of his passing?
Yeah, yeah, there were. It was
Have
nice.
you resolved to stay connected?
Yeah, but we'll see if saying it and doing it is two different things, right? So that's why I think making a practice.
Well, I think as long as you're conscious of your decision making, right? Say, look, I only have so much bandwidth, and here's how I'm choosing to use it. So being deliberate and not being accidental.
It makes me definitely deliberate about the relationships I'm invested in, right? You're not going to be friends with everyone. You're not going to be invested in everyone, but the ones you are invested in, tend to the garden. Tend to the
You got to
garden.
be all in, right?
Yeah, got to be all in, and then you show up when you need to be. You got to show up and I don't know. That's what I'm going through right now at this age.
It's an important age now, especially that you have two young children. You think about things differently. Your sense of responsibility changes dramatically. Now, I had kids very young, but I remember it had a huge, it forced me to grow up too early, perhaps, but it had a huge impact on me. And I'm fortunate now because I have grandchildren at a pretty young age, and that's a blessing. I would have taken better care of my kids if I knew how good it was to have grandkids, you know?
You know what I tell my dad? I say, Dad, I point to my son. He's 4. He turned 4 yesterday. I said, Dad, look at him. He's going to be your revenge for all the times I broke your balls. He's going to break mine. And my dad goes, yep. You know,
So you're on this path, you're in New York, you're doing some interesting things. How does this world evolve for you that you're able to apply your interest, refine your skills for filmmaking, for facilitating, for bringing people together, for questioning, developing vocabularies that help us to do things? You become a master at relationships. And that is a journey. It's no one thing. It wasn't any degree. It wasn't one thing you read or did. What went into the soup of who you are now?
definitely 10 years of sitting in the space of watching people have conversations. That's definitely been very informative.
Amazing.
The end is, you bring two people into a room who have a relationship. You've read a form that they filled out, and you give them each 10 questions, 12 questions to ask each other, and you watch. And it's a really interesting experiment, isn't it? Of allowing humans to be humans. You watch them and see their relationship, but through their relationships, you see your own. Am I like that? Do I do that? Do I not do that? Could I do that? That's been very informative for me, as well as having my own relationships in my life. I met my wife when I was 42. So I was single for a long time, had many different relationships.
And how did that serendipity happen?
I remember walking through Williamsburg with my dad. This is like, when was this? In like the mid 2015, 2012, 15, 2017. And my dad was walking through, we walked like 5 blocks from my apartment to a restaurant. And my dad saw so many beautiful people. He's like, you're never going to get married. You're going to be single forever. There's just too many options here. There's too many options here. And that serendipity happened because I went through a process, obviously a long process, but a pretty intense one. I met her in January of 2018, and in October of 2017, end of August, early September 2017, I went through a few experiences that started shaping me to really own the entry of a life partner, and that was the realization that I didn't love myself. And then I realized the number one step is I got to love myself. And I was going to sound cliche now, but I had that experience at Burning Man. It was the first and only time I went to Burning Man, but that was one of the big lessons. Is I really had this full experience of understanding, oh my God, Topaz, you don't love yourself. And you can search all you want to find your partner. In my case, a feminine energy of a woman, a feminine energy, but you need to ground yourself. And instead of searching, I'm going to be crude here, but find your balls in the earth. You got to ground yourself and know who you are And it's not about going out to search. It's about finding you and be you and ground in your, and like the way I saw that was like taking my balls and just grounding them deep in the earth. And that was a huge shift for me. And I'm sorry but I'm being honest. That's what it was.
We sort of like honesty. And so you started your journey of helping other people by being deliberate about taking your own first step.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like it's possible that what you teach other people to do, you're only a little ahead of them on the path.
No, yeah, exactly. And actually, I don't see it as teaching. I see it as creating the space. And I learn from them. I learn from the courageous participants.
You taught me. I will confess to you that my wife and I had told her about the conversation I was looking forward to having with you today. And she was looking at your book. And she skipped ahead to question 12 and asked me that tough question. Why do you love me? We're married 50 years. We have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and we just celebrated our 50th anniversary. And I want to tell you that there was some emotion shared. So thank you for that. But you are teaching because you got some people who were looking forward to getting to know you, reading into what you're doing. I love, as a family, the idea of using the cards, the end playing cards. Someone just gave me for Christmas, 2 ladies who work here just gave me for Christmas a spinning wheel to play as a family, where you just spin it. Whoever gets it has to answer the question. And it's conversational, provoking, insight provoking kinds of questions. This is even better. I can't wait to get my family to engage with the end playing cards. A lot of thought, a lot of work goes into this, but I'm going to tell you, the family will be better for it.
Oh, thank you. You couldn't get a better plug, and I couldn't agree with you more. I want to send you the family deck. When I heard you playing with it, I'm like, I can't wait to send Jim the family deck. By the way, this is another plug, but do you know that all our card games are for sale on 800 Flowers as of like 3 weeks ago?
I do.
Oh, okay, you know
I
that.
do.
Okay.
Yep. How long did it take you to write the 12 questions of love?
So that took me about a year, but of 10 years of work.
Yeah,
right? 10 years distilled.
It's so well put together.
Thank you. Well, I haven't talked about any of the learnings for 10 years. This is the first time. We're in our 11th year now. This is the first time I've taken 10 years of work and put it into a guide, a toolkit for people. I've distilled it down because I've stayed away from putting my face out there because it's not about me. It's about the conversations.
What was the thought process when you started this work, when you started with the Skin Deep project here? Did you have an idea how it would become a way you could make a living? Did you have an idea that it would result in something as meaningful and as impactful as the 12 Questions for Love that became this terrific book? Did you have that early on, or were you just doing, and it felt like you were doing something good?
I go with questions. I did know that I knew about 9 months in, when I saw the first edit of an and, that I was on a long journey, and that journey would be that one day I'll get to 6,000 conversations. I'm at 1,200 now, a little over 1,200. We'll get to 6,000. That we'll have a book. Obviously, I knew that at some point it would happen. But when I first started, and it was very scary when I first started, the question was, how is the emotional experience of being human changing or shifting in this new digital landscape of that was the question.
Have you seen a lot of change just in that 10 years?
Absolutely. If you look at young people now, they're not having conversations. They're having monologues that they send over through voice notes on WhatsApp or whatever direct message. It's actually a monologue that you then send, and then you listen to the monologue, and then you have a monologue. So it's different kind of listening. It's a different kind of conversation. It's and emojis and dating patterns and the commoditization of dating, for instance. I think there's a huge shift that's happened, and we as humans are so good at adapting to change. We are so good at adapting to change that we think it's always been like that. But you know, for you and I feel like I'm the last generation that I remember when the fax came out.
You're the last generation that wasn't born digital.
Yeah. And I remember the shock and awe of all this that's happening now, because I remember being a kid being shocked that you could put a paper in a machine and somewhere else it would come out. It was like, what? I remember the, you know, I remember
The
playing
dial-up
Frogger,
modems. Mhm.
dial-up mode, right? And now new generations, it's always been like that. And I think it's just they take it for granted. And I think that applies to our emotional experiences as humans. We call it love, but it's not the same kind of love that 2 generations ago felt when they had to write a letter to each other, and they waited for 2-3 weeks for a response. You know, that's a different kind of, and they can talk to each other and hear each other's voice, but they can't see each other's faces. It's a different kind of emotional space to be in. And I'm not saying it's better or worse, because that's not a good question in my opinion.
No,
That's not a
because it is. It's not better or worse.
It's here. It is. So it's like you're in a flood and you're like, is a flood good or bad? Like, who cares? There's a flood. The question is, what are we doing? What are we doing now to really make conscientious of our relationships in the world of social media and technology?
You're in demand all over the place. You went from not being public at all to being quite a high profile because of the quality of the work you've done and the impact you've had on people. I imagine you're quite in demand for speaking. You mentioned how having these digital tools, these video digital tools, helped you to do your thing. What's on the horizon for you? How does this spin next? Do you think that you can impact more people and have a bigger imprint on the people around you and the people who want to benefit from what you've seen and learned?
Applying these conversations to a deep a world that has more listening. And so the question asked is, how can I apply this and format that's so powerful, both for participants and for the people who watch, to help create a better world, one of better listening? And I say that without a political agenda. I just say the practicing of listening and greater understanding of another human. So that's a question I ask. And I don't know, maybe is it 12 questions for peace? Is it ideally it's teaming up with other organizations and really bringing conversations that you don't often see into different contexts. So something in July, we're going to be doing something with doctors and patients, for instance. But just, I have this format. I have an incredible tool. How can I apply it into more spaces?
Let me borrow some of your thinking. We created a little program around here around flowers. So we're several brands, and we have locations around the country, increasingly around the world. And I was concerned with some people being remote, or at least being remote part of the time, that our culture was suffering, that we weren't developing those relationships where people really got to know one another. So Faith Bradley, who runs HR for us, she and I, over a cup of coffee, decided we were going to create something called bunches. So we have a group of people who are high performers. They're identified by their leader. They're at a certain rung in a company, and we bring them together for a year-long program where they meet in person 3 or 4 times over the course of the year. The rest of the time, they're doing things like this in a Zoom kind of format. They have some development tools. They read books together. They take a battery of tests. They do a lot of breakout sessions. They meet with some psychologists. It's a personal development year. And then we've asked them, the graduates of our Emerald program, so we call it the greenest of the green. We're a red, yellow, green kind of measuring system. And we take our greens and those that should be promoted or lead something significant for us in the next year or two, we put them in the Emerald. They're nominated to the Emerald program. So we're asking the Emeralds to form a group of about 6 people. And they can't, and we tell them who they are. Someone from a brand they don't work with, some that's not a subordinate of theirs. And we call it bunches because we're in the flower business, so we call it bunches. The person who graduated from our Emerald program is asked to lead a bunches group. And it's all about creating connectivity, learning, getting to really know other people. And our supposition is they'll be better people. They'll have a better time in their work environment if they really feel connected. If they really feel there's a few people out there who care about them, are invested in them, and are there for them. And we've only started several months ago, but she was telling me just recently how she's getting really good feedback, especially for the newest people, especially for the people who are remote, to say it was so hard. I left 2 other jobs because I never felt like I was part of things, and I already feel like I'm part of things here. That I can ask them any questions about the company, where it's going, ideas, and we primed the pump with some questions. But I bet you could help us think about that in a very different way. And I bet there's people who'd like to be in your bunches that you created
Absolutely.
to feel connected. I'm so concerned about the number of people, not just young and not just old, who definitely feel lonely all the time.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's an Israeli company we invested in called Wisdo that created these online communities around different subjects. We ran it for free on our site for a year, and we're relaunching it now with some new tools. But I'm embarrassed to tell you that our most popular group was our loneliness group, which had 129,000 people sign up to be part of, just to be put into a group, just to have someone facilitate a dialogue. And that's where we extracted the idea from. So, can the problem be the cure? Can these digital tools, which are contributing to the problem, can they also be a remedy?
100%. Let me give an example.
Please.
Here's a superpower that we have in this, let's call it the Zoom room, Google Meet, whatever it is. But let's just say it's a superpower that we have this remote. Here's a superpower. If you get you get your 30 people in a room together, right? And we're physically in a room together and we're sitting in a circle, right? There's no desk, there's nothing. We're just doing a circle talk, just passing the talking stick around the fireplace even. It's beautiful, right? The person to my right and left, the person to your right and left are 2 feet away from you. The people next are 5 feet away. The person on the other side is 30 feet away from you. So you can't really see their face. In the Zoom room, all 30 people, I can see them at the same, we're all seeing each other's close up.
We're all 3 feet away.
We're all 3 feet away. That is a physical impossibility. That is a superpower. It's an advantage. I can see your face. I can see how you react. I can even feel more connected at the same time. The problem is, how do we utilize the Zoom room? Now, here's a difference in real life, physical life. I think I spent a lot of time on this. I can talk physical life versus the Zoom room, the digital space. In the physical life, there's always a welcoming and a departing. When you're in a meeting, you see them 20 feet away. They come through the door. They come in. They get closer. They sit down. There's a warm up. When they leave, they get up. They fade away. Even if you're on the street, you see them walk away. There's a coming and going. In the Zoom room, it's boom, boom. It's on, off. There's no warm up. There's no deep departing. So
And
therefore,
there's no
you
walk
have
down the hall together.
there's nothing. You have to bring that in. So we have to utilize the environment to our advantage. So when we just turn on and we're all in the Zoom room, create a moment to create the space of welcoming. Create a moment at the end of the meeting for departing so that you're utilizing the advantage of the physicalness, right? But the fact that we can all 30 be together and see each other on close up, just a different, it's an advantage. You just have to utilize it. And so the thing I've learned is it's about the space. So utilize the space. If you need a welcoming and departing, utilize it because you don't have it naturally on the digital platform, create it. And then the second thing is, what are the really good questions to ask? And as soon as you ask a really good question, and here's one little thing about the questions, there's 5 things, but one of them that make a good question, one of them is make sure the question involves the person asking it, that it acknowledges the person who you're speaking to, right? If you say, what do you love about work? And your wife asks you, what do you love about work? And the newest employee asks you what you love about work, you'll probably answer the same question, regardless of who's asking. But if we change the question, what do you think we both love about our work? And I ask you and your wife, and the newest employee asks, you will answer it differently because different people are asking. It acknowledges the person. And therefore, also the asker is more invested in your answer because it's reflective of me. It's reflective of our relationship. So when you're in that circle, in that space of inquiry, we're connecting, asking really good questions that incorporates everybody, incorporates the magic of each person's presence. Like as an HR department, the question I would ask an HR department is how do we make the experience for each employee or team member such that they believe or they feel that if they weren't here, the company would not be the same. That's my job.
I told this story recently. A friend of mine is a fellow who was the CEO of American Express. And a dozen years ago, I was interviewing a fellow who lived in London, was planning to return to New York for a job with us. And I asked him, "Did you remember Steve Squeri?" He says, "Oh, yeah, I remember him well," because he's been a lifer at American Express. And I said, "Tell me about it, what it was like working for him." He said, "You know what? What I remember about Steve was he would tell us all the time that his job was to make sure, whether we stayed at American Express for a long time or for a year or two, that we would always turn around and in reflection years later say, American Express was the best place I ever worked because it challenged me, it respected me, and it wanted me to do better all the time. And it wouldn't accept anything other than the best possible work I could put out." And he's shaking his head and he said, and as I think back, I think he was true to his word. And Steve still says that today as the CEO of the company, that his job is to make sure it's the best place that each of those people who come through those doors have ever worked. And it's similar to your mandate to the HR department and to us as individuals to be personally invested.
I mean, for me, I hear the question. He's like, how can I make this the best place to work by being the most challenging and requiring? It's like asking ourselves a question versus giving yourself a mission statement or a job title as an idea, because then it gives you more freedom to adjust to what's happening. There's a new solution. And I think that's really important. Is what are like, we have a coworkers deck, and I'll send you that too. I'll send you the coworkers and the family. The coworkers deck is we have one question is, what's one value we share that we do not, that our clients do not? Right? That's not one that we often ask. We always think we're always serving, but is there a value that we have that they don't? How does conflict make us better? I always like asking that. How does our conflict make us better as a team? Right?
Topaz, I was wondering as I was reading through your book over the weekend, some of the people I'm fondest of are products of a 12-step program. Is it coincidental that this is 12 questions?
No. I've actually been very moved by the 12-step program. In NA, I had a friend who was in it, and I would go, A, to support him, but then B, because I really enjoyed it. I was so moved by the honest conversations that were had. But no, in writing the 12 questions, what came up was when we sit people down in the experience, I give each of them 12 questions. So there's 24 total. And so I said, that's what I've noticed works the best. And it also follows a certain architecture. It's a 5-act architecture. So that's why 12. But I think I've followed the bandwagon of these effective numbers, right? 12 months, 12-step program. I mean,
You have a huge following now, but I think it's going to be huger in the weeks and months and years ahead. How can people who got introduced to you by this podcast, how can they follow your work? How can they stay connected to you? Because you make people feel connected right away.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Thank you for this platform and this opportunity. I really appreciate it. We, theskindeep.com is our website. Social media.
Theskindeep.com.
The Skin Deep. I mean, I have my own site, topazadizes.com, but really the Skin Deep is theskindeep.com. That's where everything is at. And our social media, we have a newsletter.
And can they buy your book there?
You can buy it there. They can buy it on Amazon. They can buy an ebook, audio. It's everywhere.
Yep. I bet the audio is particularly powerful.
I hope so. It's me reading it.
I'd be disappointed if it wasn't.
Yeah, it's like,
and of course they can buy the end playing cards for the different scenarios on the Flower site, and of course at theskindeep.com. Topaz, you're an amazing man. I'm so happy and proud. Look at how lucky I am to do this thing here. I get to learn about people like you, find out about your book. You enhanced my relationship in my weekend, just in prep for today. Thank you. And
thank you, Jim.
Like so many people meet you, I feel like I really already know you, and we've just begun a relationship.
Yeah, Jim, thank you. Thank you. You're an inspiration. I really appreciate you. Thank you for your work.